I'm Paul Sullivan, your host on the Company of Dads podcast, where we explore the sweet, sublime, strange, and silly aspects of being a lead dad in a world where men, who are the primary parents, often feel they have to hide or at least not talk about their roles. One thing I know from personal experience is being a lead dad is not a traditional role for men. Parenting is so often left to mothers or paid caregivers. But here at the Company of Dads, our goal is to shake all that off and create a community for fathers who have stepped up to be lead dads and for other dads who want to learn from them. Today, my guest is Jeff Forte, special education attorney in Connecticut and advocate for parents and children. Jeff runs one of the few law practices in the state dedicated entirely to helping families navigate the state's special education laws to ensure that their children get an appropriate education. Sometimes this means negotiating with a school district to get more services for a child who may be struggling with reading or math. Other times it means suing that district to pay for the child to be placed into a school that suits his or her educational and behavioral needs better. His wife, Dr. Solange Forte, is the executive director of Solstice Behavioral Health and Consulting. They have 2 sons and live on a farm in rural Connecticut. Jeff also has a national podcast called Let's Talk Sped Law. Jeff, welcome to the Company of Dads podcast.
Hey, Paul, thanks for having me on the show.
All right, I'm going to save the farm for later because we could go really, off the
whole podcast.
A whole podcast. Well, we'll get to that later if we have time. But so let's focus here. How did you choose this area of the law to be your specialty?
Yeah, I get that question a lot. It's really a very eclectic and quite niched practice to, get to wake up every day, come to work, and help children get a better education than they otherwise would have without my legal interventions. The gist of it is, while I was in law school, I always thought I'd be, become like this, big litigator type of lawyer, right? And I tried that for a while. But during my clerkships and internships and so forth during law school, I worked at a juvenile detention center. And long story short, there was a child that every time an adult would try to intervene and help him at school or help him in the community, he would want to grab a pen and stab that adult. So he was arrested for it.
How old was he?
He was 12 years old.
Wow.
Big kid, actually. And, I'm going in there, just completely green as a second year law school student in the criminal defense clinic for children and youth offenders. And I just downright asked him, listen, whether you like it or not, I'm here to help you. Why do you keep doing this? He says, well, if I hurt enough people, I'm going to be able to see my dad. And I said, well, where's your father? And he says, well, my father's in prison and I want to be his cellmate.
Yeah. And
it really stuck with me because at the time, I didn't even know what like a full scale IQ score was in law school yet. Right. But I started to realize this child is not fully capable of understanding what he's doing right now. And we got a psychiatric eval and a neuropsych eval and all that. And we're able to say, well, look, with some additional supports in place, we could still get him to see his dad, but we can make him more successful. So then you kind of fast forward. I'm working at a large law firm here in Connecticut for a number of years, trying different lots of cases. But I'm always volunteering and helping kids kind of on like a pro bono basis, so to speak. I helped get my wife through her doctoral level education as a board certified behavior analyst. And once she got her degree, she says, Jeff, you should really start doing what you're doing pro bono on a firm-wide basis, because there's some significant help and need for this. And I've never looked back. I was a juvenile public defender for a while as well. So I had that juvenile aspect of it.
Yeah.
And then we have a child that has an IEP for dyslexia. So I get it as a dad.
For the listeners, Jeff, what's an IEP? What does that mean?
Sure. An IEP is what a child that has a disability is entitled to receive. It's called an individualized education plan. And it's something that a school under the federal law, not to get too deep into the weeds, is obligated to provide when a child may be presenting with challenges in accessing their education at school. So you're essentially getting your child more supports than what a typical neurotypical child would be receiving by advancing and matriculating by grade to grade to grade.
Right.
You're giving the child more supports by way of special education and some related services.
Now, I feel like we're, not to come back to the farm, but I feel like we're putting the cart before the horse when we talk about the IEP. So why don't we back up and say, when you're a father, as a company of dads, father or a mother, and you have a child who you think has a learning challenge or some sort of cognitive disability, what are the biggest challenges for those parents, right out of the gate? I'm going to guess identifying is probably one of them, but what are the challenges that they need to face, early on, or when that challenge is identified?
One of the challenges is just knowing where the resources are. Okay. Although my practice is in Connecticut, because I'm licensed in Connecticut, the federal laws regarding special education are statewide. They're across the country, and they're federally mandated. So the laws,
meaning regardless of where you live, you should be able to have.
That's right.
You live in Connecticut, right. You get it. You live in Florida, you get it. You live in Montana, you get it.
Right. Okay. Now, the unfortunate reality is it can vary in the interpretation of these supports from state to state. But primarily, dads should know what the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act is, or the American Disabilities Act, or Section 504 of the 1973 Rehabilitation Act. These are laws that have been put into play to assist children. Now, most dads aren't going to know this. I actually did a little bit of research in advance of the show, and there's a survey that was commissioned in the late 1990s, and then again in the early 2000s by the National Center for Fathering. And essentially what it showed was that dads really statistically don't get that deeply involved in their child's education and schooling. Most dads.
Why is that? Why they just is this historically, or why aren't they that involved?
Work-wise, they think school is where the school team handles their child's education, and they don't necessarily get that involved. It's more like the dad role is typically where they're going to sporting events to help their kid, but they're not. They're not visiting their child's classroom. They may not even know what their child's teacher's name is, or let alone their child's pediatrician's name is.
Yeah.
Helping with homework or a big school project. You typically will see, dads go to, plays and recitals and sports,
sure.
But the parent-teacher conference, reviewing report cards, helping with homework, going on to, Google Classroom every week to make sure assignments may be in. These are things that even just without qualifying for special education, the more parents, moms too, of course, are involved, the more informed you're going to be about your child within the educational community. And I think it's something that gets lost a lot is, what is an educational community? And it involves parents. I mean, it's not just the school team. Parents should realize that they are part of their child's school team.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things we're trying to do here with the Company of Dads is to make it okay for men to do exactly this, to really be, full participants in their children's, education, in their whole, family life. But, that study that you're talking about, you mean, everything's always backward looking, but have maybe anecdotally in your own practice, have you seen any changes during the past couple of years with COVID, where at least in some communities, mom and dad, or, dad, if he was commuting, they're working at home and they're getting to see their kids learn on Zoom, and they're getting to see their kids, having these challenges being in school and out of school? Has that in some way made, fathers more involved, or is it, too early to tell?
No, you're onto something there for sure, Paul. I have seen firsthand an increase in parental participation as a result of COVID in a child's education. First of all, for any parent that is struggling and that has a child that's either suspected of having or does in fact have a qualifying disability for special education, COVID taught us firsthand how terrible remote learning predominantly was for most kids. And moms and dads, grandparents, babysitters, au pairs, they took on a role of principal, social worker, school psychologist, paraprofessional, English, math, and science teacher all in one. Yep. And parents actually saw where their child may or may not be benchmarking against grade level performance during COVID. And that anecdotal evidence then could be brought to school saying, listen, I was here firsthand and I didn't see my child being able to achieve any of the benchmarks that you're stating my child is receiving. So I've seen that increase. Another big part where there's been an increase as a result of COVID is parental participation in school meetings relating to a child's disability, because they're now remote rather than actually having to physically drive to your child's school, take a half day off. Sometimes if you're working in the city, take a full day off just to have a 45-minute to an hour meeting with your child's school team. And it really is important that dads go to these meetings. It really says something to the team when mom just shows up.
Right. So if you can, if the child has parents who are married and together, we're saying it's really important for them to present almost a united front. Like, hey, we're in this together. We're the mom, we're the dad, we're here, and that matters. Correct?
Absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely. And for parents that may be separated, it's important to know who has the educational decision-making authority over the child, because you can have a very amazing dad, but the mom and dad are separated and the dad wants to be part of the IEP meeting. And oftentimes I may have, separated spouses align in deputizing me to advance their child's education, even though there might be extraneous disagreements about other things.
Right. Well, that kind of leads into a question, a bit of a softball question here, but when parents go to you, when they go from trying to figure this out on their own, participating and then paying you, I mean, your attorney paying you for your services to negotiate on their behalf or to advocate for them or to at least advise them behind the scenes. I'm sure you do all kinds of different things, but what should they expect, or what can they expect for what they pay you or any other attorney who specializes in special education?
Yeah, sure. So really kind of comes down to three things that a family would be seeking legal counsel on. Okay. The first is almost guaranteed when a parent is seeking to engage a parent-based special education lawyer, it's because there's been a breakdown in communication between the parent team, and I'm using that term rather loosely, mom and dad or separated parents, same-sex parents, so forth, grandparents, and the school team, whereby the parents are not feeling validated. They're not feeling like they're being heard in advancing their child's case. And often that can be where there are failing grades. There could be standardized benchmark assessments that are not being met at any remote equivalent of a grade level. There could be conduct referrals, behavioral challenges, suspensions or expulsions. There could be, self-harm issues or depression and anxiety issues that lead to things like expulsions or arrests that are misunderstood. It could lead to school refusal and truancy, where there's chronic absenteeism. And there could be placement issues. So that's the second thing. So having an attorney go in to essentially shepherd the school team to do what they're actually supposed to be doing, what they're paid to do with the town's district dollars, is to educate the child. If that process is failing, oftentimes a parent lawyer is going to engage and say, all right, so what supports does the child have? All right, so the child's not going to school. We need someone to go to the home, social worker, to help get the child to school because the parents are not able to successfully do it themselves. But the second thing is where there might be an issue on a continuum of educational placements where a child may need a more specialized program that otherwise could not be provided in a neurotypical, mainstream USA public school.
Do you mean like a kid who has dyslexia, or a kid who has sort of severe autism, or more of a physical disability? What do you mean by that?
Sure. So it kind of runs the continuum. There are 13 primary eligibility categories under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And some of them are more cognitive, some of them are more physical, some of them are more behavioral. Like you mentioned, with cognitive, it could be dyslexia or a specific learning disability. It could be, significant ADHD or ADD. It could be emotionality. So it could be behavioral based disabilities, including presenting on the autism spectrum.
Yeah.
Or it can include other, physical handicaps, including blindness or deafness or, significant gross motor delays, whereby accessing a public school with 20 kids in a general ed classroom is not delivering a free, appropriate public education to meet that child's needs. And when the district is in disagreement as to what a parent may want, some of these placements can cost over, $500,000 a year with transportation. And, they're just not going to give that type of education over willingly unless sometimes they need a talking to or a lawsuit against them. So,
and you're the guy to do the talking to.
That's right. That's right.
This may seem like a silly question, but you said it's it's a federal statute, that the states have to adhere to. I mean, are some states better at special education than others, or are all 50 states more or less the same?
Yeah, no, without a doubt, there are states that are not conducive to raising a child with a disability, and then there are states that are very conducive to raising a child with a disability. And then, of course, I'm kind of speaking in generalities, but then within each state, there are pockets of districts that are better than others. Obviously, even in Connecticut. And then statistically speaking, the directors of special education, which oversee these plans, there's a high burnout rate. I mean, this is a very intense job with parents that can sometimes, be argumentative, understandably, because they're not achieving what
they want their kid to get a good education. Yeah.
Right. So what your child's IEP team may look like today is it might not be the same players, next year or 5 years from now, which is why it's so important for moms and dads to be the forever remaining member of their child's school team, because you can have historical knowledge that new incoming school team members may not have ever had.
Yeah. I mean, this isn't baseball, but I can't help myself but ask this question. Like, what are the top 3 states in the country for special education?
I would say, it's a little fluid from year to year, but predominantly Connecticut, New Jersey, and Massachusetts are within the top 3.
Okay. And are you allowed to say, like, what are the worst 3, or do you know?
Some of the more rural states, they don't even know what an IEP is. I mean, it's pretty egregious.
How do they get away with this? How do they get, as a federal statute, your kid, doesn't choose where he or she is born. Your kid doesn't choose if he or she has some sort of, learning disability, physical disability, cognitive disability. How do they get away with not providing, or living up to a federal standard?
I think part of it is parents need to get this knowledge. They need to know what their child's rights are. Just like the average American knows if they are ever presented with being arrested, they have a right to remain silent pursuant to their Miranda rights.
Mhm.
Parents need to know their child's rights if they have a disability. And oftentimes, the younger the child, the less knowledgeable the parent is, because they're going through it
Sure.
in real time at fire hose speed, right? But if I'm meeting with a family that has a 17-year-old that they've gone through 100 IEP meetings in their child's lifetime, they can call BS at a school meeting like anybody, right? So one of the things that I try to do is empower parents to understand their rights. I'm part of a national organization. The acronym is COPA, COPAA, which stands for Council of Parents, Advocates, and Attorneys. And it's open to parents. And there's an annual conference. I serve on the Attorney Development Committee to it. And you'd be amazed what the differences are in states that are not specifically following the IDEA. It's unbelievable.
And if you happen to be a parent who lives in a state that doesn't have a very good special education system, and you lived there before you had kids, you moved there because that's where your job is, or any number of reasons, what do? Are you faced with just litigating or not having another option? Like what are your options in a state like that?
Yeah, so your options are primarily the same across the country, in that you can resolve it. You can attempt to resolve it first through what's called an IEP meeting, individualized education plan meeting. Each state calls it something else. Like in Connecticut, it's called a planning and placement team meeting, PPT. It's a lot of alphabet soup vernacularly, but the point is, the first approach would be to attempt to resolve it at the school-based team meeting with your director of special ed, your special education teachers, the school psychologist, the paraprofessional, perhaps the superintendent, right? But then if that does not work, you may need to engage in getting outside evaluations that you can either attempt to get the district to fund through the law under this prong of the Individuals with Disabilities
Right,
Education
but
Act.
essentially, like if you think the person who evaluated your child at that school or in that school district didn't do a great job, you can get a similar person to do that evaluation and then bring it to the school. Is that what you're saying here?
That's correct. And that's if the school agrees to do it. If the school agrees to not fund it, they would have to institute what's called a due process administrative action against the parent.
How much does something like this cost a parent out of pocket?
Oh my goodness, it can get incredibly expensive. Incredibly expensive. I mean, if you're talking about a school that costs $250,000 to $500,000 per year, and you have a young child that needs to access that school till the age of 21 or 22, talking millions and millions of dollars. And school districts often outsource the defense of their district to major law firms that exclusively represent boards of education. So boards of eds are then paying those school defense district lawyers, tens of thousands of dollars for just one due process hearing. But yeah, on the parent side, if you win a successful case, you're talking six figures in legal fees that under the fee shifting provision of the law, if a parent wins a hearing, a parent gets what's called prevailing party status. Uh-huh. And under the fee shifting provision, the parent can then say to the district, all right, well, listen, we had no choice because you said no to us. So we instituted a due process action. We hired this lawyer over here. Here's our fees that we owe him. We won. We are now seeking a court order for you, the district, to pay our lawyers' fees. There are some lawyers that will do these types of cases that I handle primarily exclusively on contingency. Right. It kind of depends on state to state. But oftentimes it can be a hybrid model where there's like a cap where you're paying your parent lawyer a certain amount because your parent lawyer strongly feels that
Right, that
it's
you
a
have a
winnable
case and he can win. Yeah.
Right. So there's upfront costs, but then it's capped. So now that at least you're not incurring, in perpetuity.
Sure, but I mean, a process that's already, emotional, a process that's already sort of intimidating, is you against the school district on behalf of your child, is now, it sounds, costly beyond many parents' means, unless they can find an attorney who will do this fee shifting agreement. Is that correct?
That's right. That's right. And oftentimes, I represent families of all walks of life, of all financial means. Not to sound a little cheesy, but I really want to be a lawyer for the people. I thrive on representing the underdog when the underdog is a child that has otherwise gone unheard and uneducated. And oftentimes parents will have to rely on greater family to get some funds together, or take out a second mortgage, or tap into college fund money that a child may need right now in order to potentially even get to a point of independence or, group home living.
Yeah.
Once the parents are unable to care for their child. So early intervention up front is incredibly important in these cases. And it's a tough pill to swallow when you're dealing with a family that's just coming to the realization that
a lot all at once. Yeah.
Their child has a disability. The last
my child has a disability. My child can't go to the public school in the town that we moved because we believed it had good schools. We had to move here for work, and it's going to cost me tens of thousands of dollars, if not more, to get what my child is federally entitled to.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I can imagine, what would make you angry when you're going, advocating against these children, against the district. I can imagine a recalcitrant district, digging in their heels. I can imagine any number of scenarios where you would be angered in doing your job. But what angers you when you work with parents? What are the parents that, the fathers and the mothers, but what are the parents who don't get it in some way, or who are not approaching this process as you think they should? What angers you about dads and moms?
Yeah. That's a great question, because I've become a little jaded in the practice, in the sense that I can kind of smell BS from the minute when I'm meeting with a family. And I've actually authored
you're a jaded attorney? I've never heard of that before. So.
Right. I've actually authored a lot of blogs on this, that here are what I feel parents' expectations of an experienced attorney should be. And likewise, here are what my expectations of a parent should be when they're going to engage an attorney, any experience. Doesn't have to be me, but any parent special ed based attorney. And there's a couple things. Number one, both parents should absolutely be involved in all decisions. If I'm just meeting with mom, or I'm just meeting with dad, not to sound stereotyped here, but when you're talking about your child's education, it should be equally important to both parents on all grounds. So if I'm just meeting with one, it's not really, going to work. The other thing is, unlike other areas of the law that could be, kind of, black and white, there's a lot of shades of gray in this area, where the expectations and desires of what the parents want may not always clinically and educationally equate to what the child actually needs. And it's kind of a rites of passage, in where you're really relying on educational evaluators and outside clinical evaluators to more fully inform a child's programming. It's kind of a red flag sometimes if I get a call and a family's saying, I want the district to pay for a therapeutic program that has horseback riding lessons. Okay, well, good luck with that. Take it down the street. But I have had cases, where we've had children with reactive attachment disorder with dog therapy, because they're actually, developing a relationship with an animal that's just selflessly going to show affection.
Yep.
So it kind of depends, but yes, you have to keep an open mind. I always tell parents, I'm not here to do what you want me to do. I'm here to do what your child needs. And the two don't always add up.
It's been great, Jeff. It just got me thinking. When I was coming up with the idea for the company of dads and working on it, I spoke to a developmental pediatrician, sort of affiliated with Yale. Really smart person. For listeners, a developmental pediatrician is to a regular pediatrician, like I don't know, a designated hitter is to a regular position player. Yeah. And she said something that I haven't been able to forget. And she said, "There's no more lonely dad than the father of a child with a disability." She said, mothers of children with disabilities, they certainly struggle to find support, but there are, some support groups out there, but the dads are really, left in the wilderness. When you hear something like this, I mean, what are some ways to make it, less lonely or less onerous for the dads, who have a child with some sort of disability?
Yeah, it's really tough. I have a really good friend of mine who has a child with significant physical impairments, and he's kind of going through some medical insurance disputes right now that just keep pecking away at him. Right, it's not to the level where he wants to get a lawyer involved, but at the same time, he's probably, if you look at his hourly rate with work, he's probably several $1,000s deep into insignificant phone calls with people on the other side. You really need to connect yourself within the communities, right? Part of the law actually includes parental counseling. And parents often think, well, I don't need the district, my kid's district or my kid's school team to tell me how to be a parent. That's offensive. But the counseling component can be talking with your school team on a regular basis to find how they are successfully accessing your child during the day. And then using some of those strategies into the home and in the community to promote a generalization of those strategies. And oftentimes I'll find that the more communicative a dad is with the child's school team, the more they're generalizing the skills, because parents can be taught these skills in the home and in the community setting. So really, you got to really just kind of take your pride out of it, if you have that, and contact your school team, monthly meetings with your school team, to review data and progress.
Yeah.
You might have a difference of opinion as to what your child is progressing at, what's their skill acquisition rate at. There's also a lot of Facebook groups out there. I know particularly in Connecticut, there's a lot of Facebook groups for families of children with disabilities, just to kind of connect, to feel like there's an identity of other similarly situated parents out there. Social media has become a really big opportunity on that front.
Great. Jeff Forte, thank you so much for joining me today on the Company of Dads podcast. We've been talking with Jeff Forte, special education attorney in the state of Connecticut, host of the national podcast, Let's Talk Sped Law. Before I let you go, last question. What's with the farm? Like, what do you have on the farm? Is this like for the movie version of your life? Like, 30 seconds. What's on the farm?
So really quick, at the peak of COVID, COVID pandemic round one, my wife and I decided to do a little bit more farm to table type of living. So my wife bought 2 chickens, and anybody that's a farmer knows that chickens are the gateway animal to a farm. We then sold our house in lower New Haven County, Connecticut, to incoming New York people that wanted to get out of the city. And there was just this crazy bidding war. And we moved out to the country to a non-working farm where we now have like 60 farm animals. We're producing about, 2,000 eggs a year. We've LLC'd the farm. It's called Ridgeview Farm. And it's really more like a hobby farm, but the purpose of the farm is actually to serve families that have a child with a disability, so they can come to a farm in a therapeutic environment to access and work with animals, kind of spend the day there and get some social skill development with some farm animals. So
I love this, Jeff. Some people in COVID, they started baking sourdough bread and they gained 10 pounds. You bought 2 chickens and now you have 60 animals and 2,000 eggs. This is a great COVID story.
Yeah, we're doing vegetables too and stuff like that. But yeah, it's been fun. And the boys, my 2 sons, they have jobs on the farm now. So it's rewarding for them as well.
All right. Thank you again, Jeff Forte. I appreciate your time today.
Thanks, Paul.